Good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to be presenting this webinar on From Adversity to Success, Why Education Matters. This panel is sponsored by the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and is one of many in a series of rapid response webinars. We are actively planning additional programming on a variety of issues, so please visit americanbar.org/CRSJ for updates on these programs. During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A, not through the chat function. If you do not see the controls on your screen, please ensure that your screen is not idle, and then they should show up for you. I will be monitoring the Q&A, and we will do our best to address your questions, time permitting. We do have a packed program for you today, so I can't guarantee we'll get to everyone's questions, but I think that you will really enjoy the questions that we have already prepared for you today. We will be sharing a recording of this program with everyone who's registered so that you can share it widely with your networks. So I'm Beth Wittenbury, and I am the immediate past chair of the Civil Rights and Social Justice section. And when I was chair last year, one of my initiatives was to set up a web section on our website called the Civil Rights Civics Institute, where we house over 160 answers to questions that students asked of us about civil rights law and civil rights in general. And we targeted students from around the country who were primarily in underserved communities to give them a chance to ask these questions to lawyers and receive their answers. So I do encourage you to Google Civil Rights Civics Institute and look at that resource, which if you're an educator, you're just a member of the general populace, or you're a student, provides lots of wonderful answers for you. And this webinar really grew out of that initiative and is a continuation of it. And it will eventually be housed on that webpage as well. In keeping with that, I want to give a big shout out today to Lydia Sincor Templeton and to Stephanie Joseph for all their work in planning this webinar and making this happen, and for chairing our education committee for the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. With us today as panelists are the Honorable Kelvin Filer, the Honorable Rose Halm, law student Maripau, Professor Claudia Quintero, and Professor Claudia Martin Shelby. And I'm going to give them each a moment to introduce themselves to you. And we will start with Judge Filer.
All right. Well, thank you for giving me the honor of being part of this prestigious panel. My name is Kelvin Filer. I'm currently a Los Angeles Superior Court judge, and I'm so proud to say that I sit in the courthouses in my hometown of Compton, California, and I'm glad to be here this afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Judge Hong, would you do the honors?
Yes, my name is Rose Halm. I was born in China and arrived in the US as an infant, and I attended USC Law School, and I obtained a joint degree in Master's in Public Administration and JD. I was a public defender for 10 years and was assigned to all the various courts there. And I was appointed to the bench in 1985 to the Los Angeles Municipal Court and elevated to the Los Angeles Superior Court 3 years later. I was a judge for 27 years and have been retired since 2012, happily retired, by the way. And my comments and experiences are based on my appointment as the first Chinese woman appointed to the bench in Los Angeles County and the first Chinese woman appointed to the Superior Court in California. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mari?
Hi, everyone. My name is Maripau, or Mari. I am a second-year law student at Berkeley Law, and I'm originally from Miami, Florida. I feel really lucky and humbled to be a part of this panel and be able to learn from my incredible co-panelists. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about my experience navigating education and getting to law school, which is something that I never thought I would be able to do.
Thank you so much. Professor Quintero.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Claudia Quintero, and I'm originally a native from Los Angeles, California, where I went to college. I went to Cal State LA, and then I went to grad school at the University of Utah. And then I went to law school at Western New England University School of Law in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I currently live. And I practice at Legal Aid, representing farm workers half-time, and I work as a full-time tenure-track professor at Western New England School of Law, teaching legal research and writing and law and social change, working on community lawyering. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And Professor Shelby.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Carrie Martin Shelby. I am currently a full professor with Washington and Lee University School of Law, where I specialize in corporate and securities law. I teach a variety of classes in that regard, such as contracts, business associations, and securities regulation. I've also served as a visiting professor with George Washington University Law School, and I am currently serving as a visiting professor with my alma mater, which is Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. In terms of my research, it broadly encompasses a range of issues related to hedge funds and other private funds, but I've currently expanded my research to examine the extent to which corporate and securities laws could better protect against more expansive notions of systemic risk generated by racist practices and policies. So thank you so much. I am very much looking forward to chatting today.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I just wanted to give you all a little bit about me, which led me to envision this panel and the CRCI. So my background is that both of my grandfathers did not have education beyond the 8th grade. And so both of my parents actually were the first in their families to achieve 4-year college degrees. My mother, and I know this will resonate with Judge Holm, at the time she went to college, really the only profession she felt or society made her feel was open to women at the time was one of teachers. So she thought she had the choice of secretary or a profession as a teacher, and she chose the profession of being a teacher. And so clearly valued education as a teacher. My father had quite a bit of adversity to overcome. His father suffered a nervous breakdown when my dad was about 10 years old. And so his mother had to go back to full-time work. She had been a career woman before marrying my grandfather, but she had to go back to full-time work when that happened. And my dad at 10 had to get a paper route and start contributing to the family financially, as well as take care of his dad, go to school himself, do all the housework. And apparently, if he didn't have dinner on the table by the time his mom came home, there was something to pay for that. He never let me forget that. So he worked very hard his whole life and had to put himself through college. And he was convinced that the path to success was through education. So he did dedicate himself to that. And although math was a challenge for him, he also set his sights on getting an engineering degree because he felt that would be the best way he could ultimately provide for a family he hoped to have one day. So after getting his associate's degree through San Francisco Community College, he enrolled in Cal Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. Like I said, math was a challenge. And so he was borderline on his grades, contracted a bad cold, had to miss class for 2 weeks, and ended up flunking out of UC Berkeley. But that didn't stop him. He did go into the Navy for 2 years to get an electronics certification through the Navy, went through boot camp, served his time, got that certification, went back to Cal, finished putting himself through to get that degree, which ultimately led him to a very good job in what is now Silicon Valley, although at the time it was known as Santa Clara Valley and was primarily still orchards. It was just making the transition into Silicon Valley. So I, of course, had that background growing up, that deep-seated belief that education was the pathway to success and that resiliency and overcoming adversity was just something that we needed to do in our lives, no matter what was thrown at us. And I did end up being the first person in my family for my generation to go to grad school. So as you probably surmised, I went to law school, ended up graduating in the top 10% of my class, started working at what was then the largest law firm in San Francisco, and ultimately, happy to say, became chair of the Civil Rights and Social Justice section. So that is my story, but clearly everyone on this panel is a tremendous success, and I'm so anxious to hear all of your stories. So I'm going to start with our first question of the day, which is, can you describe what types of adversity you had to overcome to get where you are today? And I would like to start with Judge Hom.
I was an immigrant and a child of immigrants who were not educated in English. Chinese was my first language. I remember as a child going home from elementary school and bringing books and asking my parents to help me, and they couldn't. My father worked 24/7, so I had to learn English by myself. And what he would do would be to drop us off, my brother and myself, at the local library, where we spent almost every Saturday. That's where I learned to love books and love learning. As a child, I was born after World War II, and somehow I knew I had to identify myself as Chinese rather than Japanese, even though I didn't know anything about the war. Things have come full circle with the rise of anti-Asian sentiment, with the origin of the pandemic and China's growing power. I feel like a dinosaur because when I went to high school, one of the mandatory classes was home economics. It was cooking and sewing. When I went to my piano teacher, she asked me, what did I want to do in life? And I said, I wanted to be either a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher. And she was the one who said, you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or even the principal. So that inspired me. In law school, I was one of 22 women in a class of 160 graduates, and that's almost 15% of the school population. And I was one of 10 minority students. I understand now law school is now over 50% women, and that's just wonderful, as we can see from this panel. As a deputy public defender, I faced racial stereotypes as an Asian woman, as being non-confrontational and quiet, and was challenged by defendants who didn't believe I would be aggressive and advocate to their cause. I was also challenged by judges who just didn't know how to deal with women attorneys back then. I was a young judge entering the civil courthouse one day, and that was from the judge's garage when next to me stood an older Caucasian male. We both had our black robes over our arms. So I said to him, hi, my name is Rose Hom. And he said, hi, my name is Judge John Doe. And I don't really remember his name, but I thought to myself, how prescient of his mother to name him Judge as his first name. And of course, as a woman, and even as a man, I'm sorry, I don't want to be sexist, there's always the challenge of balancing family life with work life. I had my 2 children on the bench, well, not literally on the bench, but as a young judge, and was always torn because I was never there when I felt like I was needed, when I wanted to be there at school functions. I even had colleagues on the bench who actually contemplated resigning to be with their babies. They never did, though. And those were the challenges that I faced that I feel helped me become as successful as I am.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Professor Quintero?
Well, I thought a little bit about this question because I thought what would be most, I guess, informative or useful. And given that this is a webinar about really the value, I think, about education, the biggest adversity that I've had to overcome is the possibility of not getting an education. I was born in Mexico, and I was brought here to the United States when I was like a year and a half. And I grew up most of my life not really knowing that I was undocumented until I went to high school. And when I was in high school, I think it was my junior year of high school, my my counselor was like, all right, well, I went to a college prep high school. And so my counselor was like, all right, everybody, let's talk about where we're going to apply to college and taking the SAT and, what you want to sort of be when you grow up kind of thing. And so I was very excited because I've always excelled in school. I've always thought school was really important. And I always knew growing up in Los Angeles, my mom was a single mom. And we grew up in a primarily working class neighborhood of Los Angeles. And, I knew that I wanted more, that I wanted to go to school and raise my family out of poverty and just do more. And I always thought, I'm going to go to college and I don't know what I'm going to be yet, but I want to be something. And so when I was getting ready to go speak to my counselor, I went and I took my list of schools that I wanted to go to, one of it being Occidental College right there in Eagle Rock. And I was really excited. And my counselor at the time was like, I don't know how to tell you this, but you can't go to college. You don't have a social security number. And there's just no way that you can apply even to go to college, because this was before DACA. And so I was really depressed. I felt really sad and I came home crying and I told my mom, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I really want to go to college. And she said, nothing. There's nothing you can do. Unfortunately, you don't have status. We don't have money to hire a lawyer. We don't have, we don't want to put you in risk of deportation. There's nothing that you can do. I think you just have to face the reality that your life is going to be just getting by, like finding a job, under the table, maybe, like, who knows, you're just going to have to figure it out. Like many of us have figured it out. Because I lived in a community that was primarily Latino, undocumented. So I remember I used to dance Mexican folk dance back then. And I went to a community fair and I saw this flyer and it said, "Are you an undocumented kid?" And I was like, "Yes, that's me." So I took the flyer and I called them and I, sort of without telling my mom that I was calling them, I called them and I said, I really need help. I want to go to college. And they were like, "Great, we need to talk to your parent." And so I sort of tricked my mom into talking to the lawyer, but ultimately we ended up going to this legal aid organization and the lawyer was really helpful. And she's like, I was 17 and a half. And she was like, "I think there's some sort of relief for you here. We're going to try to do it, but we have to do it before you turn 18. And I don't know what kind of magic she did. Well, now I know because I'm an immigration lawyer, but she worked really, really fast to help me. And when I turned 18, like a month later, I got my legal permanent residence card and I had become an LPR. And I was so happy. And I said, I told her, like, I don't know what you did, but I want to do what you did for everybody else because you've literally changed my life. And so the first thing that I did when I got my LPR, well, first I lost my work permit and my social security card because I carried it around with me everywhere because I was so happy. I didn't want to part with it. And I ended up losing my purse and I lost it and it was so devastating, but I still had my status. So the first thing I did is I signed up to go to college. I signed up to go to college and I told my mom was like, "Well, you can't get financial aid right now, but we'll pay for it. I don't know how we'll figure it out, but we'll pay for your first semester. And then maybe you can apply for financial aid for the following semesters." And I vowed that I was just going to go to college. And I don't know how far I was going to go, but I was going to do as best as I could to go to college and become a lawyer. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but that was just my goal. So overcoming that big hurdle was probably the biggest adversity among a number of other things. But I think that was like the biggest to getting me to where I wanted to be.
Thank you. So inspiring. I did want to respond to a chat that I just saw put up in no way are our comments meant to demean nurses, teachers, or secretaries. I think the point we were trying to make is just that women, anyone, should have the option to do whatever they want with their life. And certainly we feel that nurses, secretaries, and teachers are very important to society. I'm very proud of my mom for having been a teacher. I'm very proud of my grandmother for having been a secretary. It's just, I feel, and I think we all do, that everyone deserves the opportunity to be whatever they want to be. All right, so let's move on to Mari. Can you go next, please?
Yes, thank you. When thinking about this question and thinking about like the adversity that I overcame, something that I really try to remember is that I got here because I worked hard and because I was resilient, but also just because I was lucky and I had people that advocated for me. I think it's important for me to recognize that there are a lot of people who probably have worked as hard and are even harder working or even more resilient than I am, that have like systemic things that prohibit them from getting to these spaces. So all that to say that I feel very lucky, and I try to recognize that like a lot of my success is also an anomaly, that I was able to kind of overcome these systemic barriers. So yeah, I just think that's important to remember. And specifically talking about it, I really related to Professor Quintero because I was born in Colombia. I moved to the US when I was 7, and it was just my mother and I, and we were both undocumented for most of my life. And most of my childhood. I also had no idea what that meant until everyone started talking about college. And I also similarly like fought to get citizenship before I turned 18 so I could go to college. So I was filling out like papers with immigration when I was like 15, trying to get my mom to fill out the paperwork so I could become a citizen. I've had a lot of my family members deported. And so it was something that I knew was very possible. And so that was definitely something that took up a lot of my childhood. I ended up moving out of my house when I was 16. So I have dealt a lot with the foster care system and with emancipation and kind of all of the laws around that. And fast forward, I'm really interested in youth law now because being a part of that world is so much. It's so different than like learning about it in school, which is what I'm doing now. So that is definitely what motivated me to go to law school. I was involved in a car accident when I was 17 that unfortunately was pretty serious. I was in a wheelchair for a year of my life, and it took 5 years to get me back to 98%. So I've had a lot of just like physical ability that I've had to like regain. And similarly to Professor Quintero, paying for college was obviously something that was really difficult. I went to UCLA for undergrad, which I loved, but being an out-of-state student at UCLA is really, really tough because it's a very expensive institution. So I'm really grateful that now that I'm in law school, I'm not consistently worried about paying for it the way that I was in undergrad. I think that's an immense privilege. And to echo what I think everyone has said, I think I've only gotten this far because of education. I think education just opens doors, and you don't even know what doors exist. And I've learned of all these doors and all these opportunities and things I can do with my career because I had an education. So yeah, I'm just very grateful to be here.
Thank you so much, Mari. Professor Shelby.
So I want to begin answering this question by sharing one of my first encounters with lawyers way back when I was a mere 13 years old. And so this encounter occurred when I first became a ward of the state here in Chicago, Illinois, and that term has since been changed to youth and care, which is incredible. So I remember this day as if it were yesterday. I recall being in my math class in the 8th grade and having that intercom blare through the room, calling me to the principal's office. As soon as I walked through the threshold of her door, there was a representative from the Department of Children and Family Services. And she shot up from her chair, introduced herself. I felt like I was in this sort of dissociative state, just trying to get through the day. We walked to her car, drove to the court building, and met with 2 lawyers. And I would later learn that the official title of these lawyers were guardian ad litem. And so I barely understood what it meant to have representation at this juncture. But after briefly explaining the purposes of our meeting, one of the lawyers looked at me and she said, "Carrie, where do you want to go? Do you want to go home today?" And that one simple question provided me with a sense of control in a situation that epitomizes chaos. They then prepared me for the courtroom and explained that I might not be going home that day. And the courts ultimately decided that my home was no longer safe due to abuse, mental health issues that were running rampant in my family, as well as chronic poverty. And so with nothing but the clothes on my back, I walked into a world that was completely unpredictable. I went on to live in 2 group homes and 3 foster homes over the course of my high school education. And despite these enormous adversities, as you already know from my very brief introduction, I am now a law professor. And I've actually just accepted an endowed chair position with Chicago Kent College of Law. And so that's one of the highest levels that you could reach as a professor. And so I'm really excited about beginning that position in the fall. prior to my life in academia, I was a hedge fund attorney with a large law firm here in Chicago for 4 years. And I also have a finance degree with honors from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And so upon hearing this story, the question automatically arises, well, how did she make it? What was the secret sauce that enabled her to persevere? And deconstructing what has led to my success, which in the large part was due to luck. And identifying what could multiply the success in others has been one of my lifelong missions. And so in engaging in this process, I could say without hesitation that I did not pull myself up from my bootstraps. It took an intricate, what I like to describe, mosaic of resources and individuals for me to continuously inch forward. There was no single person or organization that could single-handedly rescue me. When I was in high school, just to share a very brief story, I randomly met a representative from this organization in Chicago called the Ada S. McKinley Foundation, and he helped me to fill out the FAFSA. Like, I had no idea what this form was. I randomly had a caseworker who told me about this youth in college program where I could go to any state school for free. And I literally met her during my last year in high school. When I was in law school, I met advocates who had fought for years to remove some of the systematic barriers that I didn't even know existed. I remember meeting advocates who fought to increase the age of emancipation from 18 to 21 years of age, which was key for me in getting resources in college, such as medical care and also a stipend every month. And so I could talk for a while. I'll conclude by saying that I have since started a company called Decasium LLC, which is designed to kind of help students in higher education to put together the pieces of their own mosaic. I've also discovered that the most important piece of that mosaic is myself. The DA in that title stands for daughter, and it represents my journey and yearning to be a daughter when I was going through many of these adversities in higher education. And Casium is actually mosaic scrambled, and it represents that avatar of who I was when I was trying to put all of these pieces together into this beautiful version of myself. And so through this company, I'm able to kind of expand this mission through this care package program that I've created, through a blog that's on my website where I'm like posting tidbits that I've learned along the way. But I'm pretty sure that I'm almost past my 5 minutes, so I will close there. But I'm really, really eager to chat more about these adversities and how education was a very, very important door that repeatedly opened up for me.
Thank you so much, Professor Shelby. And I think I just want to highlight, Mari, that when you were recovering from your accident, it sounds like you were in foster care at that time. Is that correct?
Yes and no. It was like right around when I it started when I was 17 and then I turned 18. So it was a bit of a complicated process, but because of my citizenship, it was complicated, but because of my citizenship status, I didn't like formally register as a foster youth because I didn't want to like mess anything up, because that was right around when I was getting citizenship. So I guess to answer your question, yes and no. I was dealing with the foster system and the immigration system and recovering at the same time.
At the same time. That was really my point. So yeah. Kudos to you for that. All right, Judge Filer, we'd love to hear your story.
Thank you. I always like to tell people something, and sometimes they question whether it's true, but I'm telling you right now, it is true. I knew when I was in the 3rd grade, when I was 10 years old, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And I knew that because both my mother and father, Maxie Filer and Blundell Filer, both of them were very involved in the civil rights struggle. And they were founding members of the Compton branch of the NAACP. At that time, the meetings would be held in the home of whomever happened to be president. My dad was president for over 5 years. So the meetings were held in our home. I'm a little boy listening to all these meetings. They're talking about different strategies, boycotting, picketing, and so forth. And they would always end the discussion with, well, what did the lawyer say about this strategy? Or did the attorney sign off on this strategy? I'm sitting there and I'm saying, who is this attorney person or lawyer that everybody seems to like and respect? I asked my father. My father actually was going to law school at night. He was working 2 jobs and going to law school in the evenings. He was going to a law school that wasn't even accredited, called Van Norman University. But he told me, Scooter, that's my nickname. He said, a lawyer is a person who helps individuals. I said, I'm going to be a lawyer. And in the 3rd grade, I started carrying a briefcase at Rosecrans Elementary School, telling people I was going to be a lawyer. And I was dead set on being that. And I'm very stubborn and kind of hard-headed about wanting to accomplish what I set out to accomplish. So that was my goal. And I knew education was important. I was one of 7 children. All of us were expected to go, not only finish high school, but to go to college. I was fortunate enough to go to UC Santa Cruz undergrad. I loved it. I was very fortunate to be admitted to UC Berkeley's School of Law. I loved law school. I took and passed the California bar exam in 1980. I worked 2 years as a state public defender's office with the state public defender's office. I loved that. I had my own private practice in my hometown of Compton for 11 years, doing criminal defense work mostly and some civil stuff. I've appeared and had my objections overruled by Judge Roseham many, many times. But I love the practice of law. And then I was asked by the Compton Municipal Court judges if I would apply or if I would mind being considered as a court commissioner. I really didn't know what that meant at the time, but I learned that a commissioner basically does the same thing as a judge, except that a commissioner is hired by judges to serve as a judge on a regular basis. Now, again, I was loving the practice of law. I was also an elected official. I was on the Compton School Board for 12 years. At the same time as I was doing that, my dad was a member of the Compton City Council. I got married and had 2 beautiful daughters. So I actually was living a great life and having a great career. And then I thought about it and I said, man, maybe that's not a bad option to stay in the law and be a commissioner on the bench. And after my first day of sitting as a commissioner, I said, this is a great gig. And so I said, I might even look into maybe one day being a judge. Now, here's where some adversity comes in, though, because really everything has been, I've worked hard, but everything has been going according to plan. I was living out my dream. And then all of a sudden, and I to this day don't know what happened, I don't know why, but my marriage fell apart. And when my marriage fell apart, I dealt with it in a way that one should not deal with issues, and that is I developed a drinking problem. And I became an alcoholic. I was what we called a binge drinker. I would not drink during the week because I was dedicated to my job and making sure that I was a good commissioner. But I would drink on the weekends. I would binge drink and relying upon alcohol, thinking that's going to help the problems, and it obviously doesn't. I got a DUI. I was blessed, thank God, that I didn't lose my job because of that. But I did say, okay, I need to stop drinking. So I made every attempt to stop drinking. However, unfortunately, in learning to stop drinking and going through recovery, sometimes we fall off the wagon. Sometimes that happens, and that certainly happened with me. And then I really could have gotten a second DUI. That probably would have ended any chance of being a judge, to be very frank. And I saw my daughters on their knees praying for me. And they were simply saying, God, please do not let them take my dad to jail. That moment, September 3rd, 2000, I haven't had a drink since then, haven't come close to having a drink. That was my bottom. And that was something that really kind of turned my life around because I knew that my daughters were praying for me. I'm never going to drink again. And I haven't, and I won't. And I won't. Now, at that time, I was interested in becoming a judge, but now I'm divorced, which is not necessarily a good thing that governors are looking at when they're making appointments. I have a DUI, which certainly is not a good thing. I also was a staunch Democrat. I was a staunch Democrat, and the governor at that time was not a Democrat. So those are some obstacles that are in front of me. But nonetheless, I submitted my application. I had the support of some wonderful colleagues and wonderful community. And ultimately, I was appointed as a Superior Court judge in 2002 by Governor Gray Davis. And I was asked, where did I want to sit? And I said, of course, I want to stay in the Compton Court. And I did. And I've been in the Compton Court my entire judicial career. And it's a blessing because I can look out my window and see my elementary school. I can look out my window and see my middle school, Davis High School. I can see the top of my mother's house. I can see a high school right across the street. And my law school used to be right down the, not my law school, but my law practice used to be right down the street at 363 West Compton Boulevard. And this courthouse sits right where my church used to be. And I know I've gone up against my time.
Thank you. Right in there under the wire. Thank you so much, Judge. I appreciate everyone's stories have been so inspiring. And I'm going to go off script for just a moment because I think I heard another underlying fabric with all of what you were saying. And we were saying that education, of course, is a pathway to success, but it sounds like you're all touching a little bit on also financial literacy and the importance of that. I know, Professor Shelby, you mentioned having to fill out the FAFSA, for example. So I was wondering if you could just each take a moment and tell us how you overcame that particular type of adversity, how you financed your education, because today, as you know, that is a really big obstacle for a lot of people. So it'd be helpful, I think, for them to hear how you all did that. And I'm going to start with Mari, who I see nodding over there.
Yes, that really resonated with me because that has been, I obviously have not had the incredible experiences that everyone else on this panel has. And I'm so grateful to be around you all, but something that I feel like I'm consistently dealing with is like the finances of my education since I'm currently in it. I remember when I went to UCLA, before we started, there was a summer bridge program for first-gen students and students of color, and it was kind of like a college 101. And I remember they told us the very first class, they were like, you need to realize that there's this thing called the hidden curriculum. And like, there's a curriculum that's like what you learn in classes and your major and whatever. But there's this hidden curriculum, which is like all these things that you need to succeed that they're not going to teach you in class. And that's what you need to focus on. And that really blew my mind. I didn't have a resume. I didn't know what a resume was. I didn't know like what a stock was. Like, I just had no idea anything about financial literacy. And I think learning that was something that I was lacking the second I got to college kind of put me on a quest to figure it out. I think in general, not just for financial literacy, there are people that are always willing to tell you how they did things. And part of it is just getting over the nerves to ask them. When I was a freshman, I would ask the sophomores. And when I was in college, I would ask the incoming law students. And now I'm in law school and I'm asking lawyers. And I've just been really grateful that people have kind of been in my position, figured it out, and they're willing to tell people. As far as financing school, it's really hard. Because of my like status and everything at UCLA, I had to apply to transfer out every year in case I couldn't like receive the requisite amount of funding to stay at UCLA. So I always had like one transfer app in the back of my pocket, and I had a boss who was like, you're wasting your time applying to transfer. Like, you need to be applying to scholarships. And I went to the Scholarship Resource Center. I asked people who had gotten scholarships, and I was on this like deadline to apply to a scholarship a week, which I did until I was able to like by 1,000 fill my tuition for UCLA. And obviously I'm super grateful that I got that opportunity, but I always was balancing my undergraduate education with a scholarship app, a scholarship interview. And so when I was applying to law school, I was really not excited about the fact that many people graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And I was thinking there's not enough weeks. Like, there's just no way that I could make that happen. And I'm really grateful that a lot of law schools have like substantial scholarships. For example, at Berkeley, I'm a Berkeley Law Opportunity Scholar. It's only for first generation students and it's full tuition. And I know that's such a blessing, and I'm so grateful because for the first time, I'm able to just go to school without really worrying about the money, which has made such a difference in how like easy it is to be a student when you don't have to worry about the money. But I had no idea that these scholarships and opportunities existed. I only heard about them because I talked to people who were a little bit ahead of me. I knew someone who was a law scholar when they were at Berkeley, and they were the ones that told me to apply to this scholarship. So my short answer is just talk to people, because that's really been what's helped me.
Thank you. And try to know what you don't know, right? Right? And ask the questions so that you can get the answers. I don't want to put any of the rest of you on the spot for disclosing personal financial information, but if you have anything in general to add to what Mari's already said about channels for people who might feel that just the finances are a barrier to success, I'll just give us a few moments. Anyone any panelists who'd like to say something, please feel free.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the internet is a great resource to find and read about ways to support your financial the education, the finances of your education. Part of what I always knew I wanted to go into public interest. And so when I was in law school, I tried to learn as much as I could about the public interest, public service loan forgiveness program and what the requirements were for that. And how do I make sure that my loans, if I have loans, are consolidated properly, and just making sure that I'm as informed as possible. And I think now with the digital availability of information, it makes it so easy to just like go on YouTube and like watch a webinar or get that information that you need. But also really using the resources in your institutions, like your career services and your counselors, and depending on what level of school you're in, because those, like Mari's talking about, those mentors are going to be invaluable to giving you information. And now me as a professor, I'm always talking to my students about these things and making sure that they're aware, like, do you know about this or do you know about that? So that they're able to go and find out and research it themselves too, so that they can confirm that information. But just asking lots of questions, doing lots of research, and always trying to stay informed is top for financial literacy.
Thank you. And I'll just add that, if you think that there aren't resources out there for you, there probably are. If you do that research that everyone's been talking about, don't let that be a barrier before you absolutely check that you can't finance it in some way and get help, grants, loans, whatever they may be, hopefully grants and not loans. I will say that our current chair of the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, Juan Thomas, has made it his theme this year to address financial literacy. And he just did an incredible Economic Justice Summit in Washington, D.C. And I believe that some of the video recordings from those sessions are available. And I'm sure that our staff person who's helping us out today can put links in the chat to those programs as well. So unless someone else has something really important to say on this subject, I think we'll move on to the next question. All right, great. So the next question rather, is how do each of you define success? We've been talking about your path to where you ended up, but I think it'll be interesting for our audience to hear from you how you define success. And I'd like to start with Professor Quintero to discuss that, please.
I think for me personally, the way that I define success is my ability to set goals and accomplish them. Whatever those goals are, they can be really big or really small. And part of it for me has always been using mentors to help me achieve those goals, because there is no way that any of the successes that I've had I've done them by myself. And so, I've had many successes in my career. Part of, I work at Legal Aid, like I said, and I have exposure to so many clients that are so resilient, particularly as farm workers. And the success that I find in that job is being able to accomplish my goal of like connecting with my clients and being able to be a resource to them in the community and somebody that they can turn to who are fearful. I remember when I was in law school, one of the goals that I had was that I really wanted to be on law review. I don't know why, but everybody was like, you should be on law review. And I never even knew what law review was, but I was like, okay, how do I make that happen? And I set out to talk to all my professors. What do I need to do? Well, you need to do really good in legal research and writing, and you need to be able to be in the top 10% of your class, et cetera. And I set out to do that, and I ended up on law review. And so just setting small goals for myself, and it doesn't matter big, small, they could be intangibles or actual tangible things. And being able to do what I need to do to accomplish them is how I define success. And even if it means that I am not able to do it because I'm either have the limitations or I just don't have the access to it, I set out to inform myself and to find what I need to do to try to accomplish that goal. And then I know now, like maybe it's not a goal I can accomplish today or in 3 months, but maybe it's going to take me a year, and I'm just going to work towards that. And that to me is still success. And it's about just having the mindset that you need to prepare yourself for that.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent point about establishing reasonable goals and then working to achieve them as a way of getting to success ultimately. Thank you. Mari, I have you next on my list to answer this question. How do you define success?
Sure. So I would define it 2 ways. I'm from Florida. I don't know if anyone knows what Publix is. It's a very popular grocery store in Florida. And I worked at Publix since I was 13. And I wasn't really sure I was going to go to college. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just remember one day I had like a 10-hour shift and I was just like scanning things. And I realized that I wanted to do something else and I didn't know what options I had. So I think looking backwards now, I think success is just having options. I feel really fortunate that when I graduate law school, knock on wood, I can kind of do whatever I want with that career, which is amazing. There are so many people who have to work in jobs that either support their families or jobs that are available to them. And so I think success is being able to decide, like, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to live? What kind of lifestyle is my job going to have? And I feel really grateful for that. And the other way I would define success is, and this is hard, is trying to just like tune out the noise. I think especially in this profession, there is always something else you can do that is more prestigious or impressive. And you can make it to one goal and you will already be hearing about the next goal that you can achieve. And I think part of being successful or feeling successful is tuning out that noise and recognizing that you like are now in a place where 5 years ago, like this was your goal, and realizing that you're living in the moment that is what you wanted, instead of thinking, okay, 5 years from now, I need to be doing this, or I need to become a partner here, or I need to clerk for this. And just being happy in your current state.
Being grateful for what you've already achieved while still reaching for more. Yes, very good points. Thank you. Professor Shelby?
Oh, my response to this question builds on so much of what was already said. I mean, success broadly encompasses the ability to achieve a stated goal. I think it's extremely important to be cognizant of your own personal definition of success, whatever that may be. I think it's also important to acknowledge that definition, those underlying goals, can change over time. I remember when I was in the system, success was as simple as waking up in the morning and going on about the day. And when I went to college, success was very much about getting good grades, because in high school, I had a semester where I had like 3 Fs. And the fact that I was even in college in my mind was just this major privilege. So for me, success was very much about getting the best possible grades that I could get. And then when I went to law school, it actually was very much about self-sufficiency. How can I be independent? How can I pay my bills? What can I do so that I am independent and self-sufficient? And then when I really started my career, that definition became even more broad in thinking about, well, where are my strengths and how can I best deploy my strengths, and who am I outside of my trauma? How can I have purpose in my life while putting in the work to embark upon this healing journey, which in many ways was delayed due to having to work so incredibly hard all the time. And I've also had to learn that success is not linear. Failure is a major, major, major component of success. And it can hurt. Rejection can feel awful, but that rejection, that failure may be pivotal to your future success. And I cannot stress that enough, because I meet with students all the time who have suffered major disappointments, only to learn 5 years later that they achieved an even bigger goal. And that failure actually was a stepping stone in helping them to get there. So understanding that, success can move in a zigzag, it can move in a circle. You have to be really creative about how to achieve your goals, right? Like what can, in terms of funding college, there are all these creative ways of going about doing that, as we already heard from the panelists. And then also celebrate your successes. I am all about honoring myself, doing whatever that means for me, whether it's going out for dinner, going with friends, like celebrate all of the things, all of the milestones. Because when you forget to do that, you dismiss all of the work that you've done. So with that being said, those are my remarks on success.
And I just want to note for everyone on the call that Professor Shelby just admitted she got Fs at one point in her academic career, and now she's a professor. So, if that's happened to you, don't think it's all over, right? Keep going.
You never know.
You never know, and you can get there. And just because you've had a bad semester or a bad class or whatever doesn't mean that you should stop your education. So, Judge Filer, you are next.
Okay, so there are about 1,700 judges in the state of California, 580 judges in LA County. So I'm very grateful to be one of those Superior Court judges. But when you ask, how do I define success? I would say by something that's instilled in me from both my parents, and that is that I can reach back and help somebody else. And to me, that's what I love doing. That's why I asked to stay in Compton, because I don't turn down requests to go to career days. And when I go over to the students, what I tell them is, if I was able to achieve my dream, whatever your dream is, you can do it, and never, ever give up.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure, Judge Filer, that you look at the chat. There's a very nice comment in there about what you said earlier, and I don't want you to miss it.
Absolutely.
All right, that brings us to Judge Hom.
How do I define success? I think others have said this. It's so individual and personal, and it also depends on your stage in life. I would actually define success as succeeding at what matters to you most. And this will change from day to day, from year to year, decade to decade, and as your circumstances change. Some think that being a judge is the pinnacle of your legal career, but I know judges who weren't successful because they resigned, not feeling happy at what they were doing. One resigned after a few years because he was more comfortable with being an advocate than being neutral. Another resigned because he couldn't make up his mind. And we all know that as judges, you have to make up your mind. You have to decide. That's your job. He ended up going to medical school, and one wonders whether he's able to make up his mind still. But in different stages of your life, as a student, success may be getting a good grade, going to the college of your choice. As a lawyer, it may be winning a motion, joining the law firm of your choice. And as a judge, it means following the law in an impartial and neutral manner. Frankly, there were days during trials where I would be so angry at counsel that I would welcome the break, go back in chambers and breathe deeply and say, this is another break, just be calm, because attorneys do test your patience. And they, as all of us know, that's part of their job. Now that I'm retired, and have been retired for over 11 years, success for me means staying curious, staying involved, staying healthy, and being an important part of my family and my friends' lives.
Thank you very much. So we have just heard some amazing things, and I know we've already addressed to an extent through your answers how education has played a role in your success. But if you'd like to say just a few more words, each of you, on exactly what role education played in your success, that is our next question. And Mari, you are the one designated to start on this subject.
Loaded question. I think law specifically is oftentimes really confusing and difficult to understand on purpose. And I think this field is kind of really hard to understand unless you're in it. When I think of what I want to do now, I don't think I knew the buzzwords that I'm using now last year when I was already in law school. So I think education has specifically played a huge role in my success, because I think this career is one that requires you to kind of learn from scratch. And I think having a community that facilitates that education has been really important for me. The school that I go to, I love, and I feel like I have a lot of professors who are really rooting for me. And I have a lot of just administration that is rooting for me. So yeah, I think I think this is a field that requires a lot of demystifying. And I'm really grateful that education is continuing to do that for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Professor Shelby.
What I love about education just was the exposure to continuous learning. And I worked in high school, as many of my co-panelists have had to do. And I found myself just being really bored by the day-to-day tasks of what I had to do in retail, for example, and food service. And there's no judgment at all, but I really liked the exposure to just a wider range of opportunities and people and subject areas that I probably would have had limited access to. So for example, I remember taking economics for the first time in undergrad, and I was so incredibly fascinated and excited about the subject. And I continued on that path. And it was really exciting for me. And I felt like I unlocked all of these secrets that, these are concepts that seem to be really complicated. It seems as if people are talking in a different language. What does it mean if someone with my background learns these subject areas? What does that mean for myself? What does that mean for my community? So I also think there's just this essence of justice involved in accessing education and in opening those doors and in creating paths for others. So just having that exposure to continuous learning, the relationships with my peers and professors, some of which have lasted the duration of my professional career. And then just, the self-sufficiency piece of it. I was very practical even at 18 years old and kind of running the numbers and what can I make given different opportunities. And education seemed to be a clear path for self-sufficiency. And that's not to dismiss other paths, but at least at that point in time, I was like, okay, if I do this, I have a greater chance of being self-sufficient. So education was huge for me. I'll conclude in opening several doors and opportunities that probably would have otherwise remained closed.
Wonderful, thank you. And it appears that you're all so wonderful at this that you are really combining our next question with this one. And the next question was, what would you tell young people today with respect to education? So for the sake of our timing, which I'm watching carefully, I think we will combine what role did education play in your success with what would you tell young people today with respect to education? And Judge Filer, you are up next.
All right, so education is the key. That's the one phrase that I would say. Education is key, whatever it is that you want to obtain from an academic standpoint. If you're going to go to law school, you got to learn how to read a lot of stuff. You got to learn how to write. Education is the key. Also, going to college, going to law school, there's a little bit more than the academic accomplishments because you get to meet people. You get to expand your social outreach. You're going to make friends. I have friends who are friends of mine right now, and we met in law school, and we will be friends for life. And I can't tell you how many people I met and who I interacted with and became associated with, who helped me later on from a career standpoint. But it all starts with education.
Thank you. And that brings us to Judge Holm.
I mimic what Judge Filer says. My father came to the US in the 20s, and I have an older brother who, when he came to the US when I was a baby, he was 14 years old. He was told when he tested that he'd be a perfect farmer because he didn't know English. Unfortunately, he was not a perfect farmer. Fortunately, he went on to medical school and became a board-certified surgeon. I found out from my father that his wish to have all his children in the US was to have them have an English education and then take us all back to China. Well, lucky for me, that didn't work out. But he instilled in all of us the importance of education and how it exposes you to everything that life has to offer. I believe each of us has a passion and a purpose, and education will open us to different worlds and tell us where that passion and purpose is.
Wonderful. Thank you. Professor Quintero?
I would echo a lot of what folks have said already, but if I could add one last thing is that, you know, education certainly is invaluable for allowing you to have seats at tables that might not be available to you otherwise. And while I value education, I think education is highly important. I would say that we want to question everything. You know, when you're receiving an education, I'm a critical legal scholar. I went to school to study rhetoric. I got my master's in rhetoric, and I question everything. Why does this exist? Why are you telling me that this is the way that things are? Why? And I'm using education as a way to seek and find ways to dismantle systemic inequities or challenge or question power structures and imbalances. So while you're getting your education, or if you've already gotten your education, and education and learning never ends. It's continuous in all of facets of our lives. And questioning, why is it that those laws exist the way that they do? Why is it that this has not existed before? As an example, when I started doing my work as a farm worker advocate, I found out that there was a law that allowed farm workers in our state to earn $8 an hour. And that law is still on the books. And to me, I was like, why does this law exist? Why is it that we have allowed this to permeate, to like exist in our society in our time and age? And I started doing research and I started educating myself. And then I started questioning, like, why is this the way that it is? And why did nobody teach me this when I was in school, when I took labor law, when I did this or that? So certainly take the education that you're getting and allow it to enrich your life, but ask questions and do more research, because what you're learning is just the surface. There's so much more below that, and use that education and that knowledge to help you achieve success. So part of what we did was, when we discovered that these laws existed, that they're rooted in racial inequity, we filed a bill to right that wrong and educate everybody else, because that's the other thing. Take your education and share it with others. And it will allow you and others to, you know, and I think education, the other thing that it does is certainly opens doors, but it does not disvalue other people. Like, some of the smartest people that I know are my farm worker clients. And that's not to say anything of anybody on this panel. I think everybody's here is very educated and very, you know, knowledgeable, but just because they're not educated doesn't mean that they're not smart. They are some of the smartest people that I know, and so wise, and I'm always learning from them. So knowing the difference between education and intelligence, I think also, but just ask questions and challenge everything.
Excellent point of the fact that just because you're educated doesn't necessarily make you smarter than anyone else, right? But it is a pathway to bettering yourselves, which I think was what the bulk of the comments were going to there. But excellent points. Thank you so much, everyone. We are going to need to speed it up a little bit here so that we can stay within our time. So if you can keep your answers to the next few questions really succinct, we will all appreciate that. So the next question is, what are the different roles one can play after receiving a law degree? And as you answer this question, if you could speak to the role that you are playing, and if that role was the role that you intended filling when you went to law school, I think that would be interesting for people to hear. And we'll start with Professor Shelby on this one.
So what are the different roles? I would put the potential roles of lawyers in buckets. One role that immediately comes to mind is advocate. As a lawyer, you are invariably advocating for a range of clients. I would also say that lawyers are oftentimes leaders with respect to organizations and thinking about politics. I have used my law degree to be a law professor, to be an educator, to think critically about what the law should be within my particular areas of expertise, which is actually really exciting. I did not plan on becoming a law professor when I went to law school. And it was really through mentorship that seed was initially planted. I had a professor who saw that spark, and he would constantly encourage me to consider going into academia. And it wasn't until I was well into my practice experience that I then revisited the question. And I always doubted my ability to be a scholar. I thought immediately that I would be a great teacher, but how could I be a scholar? But during my practice experience, there was this massive financial crisis, and this law was passed called the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010. And I used that law as a launching pad to think about what the law should be in relation to how public and private investment funds are regulated, and thinking about the unique harms that they can create given the increased complexity of our financial system. And I have now been able to infuse more of my lived experiences into my scholarship by thinking about more expansive notions of systemic risk, being threats to the financial system that can arise from racism, which many scholars have not really delved into that unique question. And how can regulatory apparatus under corporate and securities laws be utilized to protect against these issues? And so infusing my lived experiences in my scholarship in a way that others perhaps would not have thought about. I also infuse my lived experiences into my identity as an educator. And so my philosophy is to make these areas of the law, which many would assume are highly complicated, how can I make these areas of the law more accessible to a wider range of students who may completely balk at the notion of taking federal securities regulation? How can I engage all of us to sit at these tables and talk about these issues that in actuality affect us all on a day-to-day basis?
So not really what one would typically think about, the path being maybe when you go to law school, right? So you have definitely expanded that into what you're doing as an academician. Is that the right?
Yeah.
A professor. All right, Judge Filer.
Yes, and my whole theory was I wanted to help people, and the people who I felt needed the most help were individuals who were charged with criminal offenses. And so I was a criminal defense lawyer, and I loved being a criminal defense lawyer. To this day, I miss giving closing arguments. I miss cross-examining witnesses. There's nothing like the theater of a trial. And I did it for 11 years. I loved it. When I was asked to come on the bench, I came on the bench, and I said, this is a pretty good gig. Now, instead of asking for a decision to be made in my favor, now I'm making the decision. So it's a great job as well. But those are the two options that I've been fortunate enough to experience, and both of them have been great.
Wonderful. Thank you. Judge Hom, you want to speak to the different roles lawyers can play?
Lawyers can be, as others have mentioned, politicians, political commentators. They're also writers such as John Grisham. You can also put your face on TV like Judge Judy, or TV reality hosts like Jerry Springer, and you can practice in all aspects of business. When I received my joint degree, SC offered that degree and other degrees within the same 3-year period, and it's expanded its program. So now you can get, in addition to a JD, you can get a master's in social work, in pharmacy, in communications, and of course, all aspects of business. I have to echo what Judge Filer said. I loved trial work. I loved being a lawyer. I loved the arena. There's something like a circus atmosphere. There's an excitement in trial work, and I really did miss it. So, but when I went into civil, what was really demanding was trying to settle cases, because you can't just tell people to settle. You have to get yourself involved with each of their problems and issues. And that's where psychology helps. That's where empathy helps. That's where understanding where everybody is coming from different places and how you can try to work things out so they come to the same place. Sometimes I was successful. Then other times, attorneys just, or actually not attorneys, their clients would just try cases just to try cases, to beat up the other person, even if they knew they were going to lose. There was a lot of ego involved in trial work. I enjoyed it though, and I'm now happily retired. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Quintero?
I think in terms of the role that lawyers can play, I see myself as a supporter of the community. I'm a community lawyer. I think of myself, through the models of community lawyering, movement lawyering, as a support system to the community. I neither lead or direct my community, but instead I support the community in what they need. So I let them guide me. And in that role, I serve, as a resource to what they need. And they come to me and they say, we're experiencing large bouts of homelessness because of the pandemic. Can you help us? Can you guide us in what we can do? And through my expertise, I can guide them. But that's how I see my role. And that's one way that lawyers can serve, in addition to the ways that fellow panelists have discussed. We talk about us as being leaders, and we can be, but we can also just be like a really strong support system to the community, which already exists and thrives in its own way, to guide them in what their goals and successes are. So that's how I see my role. And I see myself first as a community-based lawyer and then as a professor. And I try to bring the community into the law school by allowing our students to volunteer with community-based organizations, inviting the community into our space at the law school, which can sometimes feel very intimidating and elite. So we try to create events and opportunities for the community to be on campus, and ways to meld the two. So having events and programming that is informative to our students, but also informative to our community, and integrating that, because I think that as a resource, law schools are huge resources for communities as well. So how can we integrate that all together? So those are the roles that I never really saw myself being a law professor. Similar to Professor Shelby, it was another law professor mentor who was like, hey, I feel like you'd be a really good professor. Like, do you want to apply? And I like teaching skills. I taught legal research and writing. I think writing and research are very important for success as a lawyer. And I was like, you know what? I could do it. Well, I didn't think that I could do it. I thought, sounds like I could do it. I don't know if I can actually do it and like if they'll hire me, but I'll give it a shot. You never know. And so
and they did.
Did. So yeah.
That is wonderful. And I'm sort of hearing a trend that I think so far everyone has said this is not exactly where they planned to go when they first started on their law degree, but it is where you've ended up, and you're showing there's a huge diversity of things that you can do with a law degree. Mari, do you have anything quick to add on this? I know you're still in law school.
This has been really helpful for me because I obviously have not yet seen what I can do with my degree, but I'm very excited to know that I have options. So thank you to the panelists.
Wonderful. I think you've all already answered the next question we had, which is why we need lawyers in our society. So I'm going to skip that again for the sake of timing. And I'd like to go to the next question, which is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to enter the legal profession? And so I believe the next person to start us off now is Judge Filer.
All right, I'm going to combine this answer with the next question as well to anticipate, because I want to make sure I touch on this issue.
Okay.
I want all of the students, my father's name is Maxie D. Filer, M-A-X-C-Y, middle initial D, last name F-I-L-E-R. I want you to Google that name. And I want you to Google that name because this is what I want, the message I want to leave with you. Never, ever give up on your dreams. I told you, my father was in law school when I was in elementary school. He took the bar exam in 1967. In order to pass the California bar exam, you have to score at least 70%. It's offered twice a year. There's no penalty for failing. He failed the exam twice in 1967. He failed it twice in 1968. Failed it twice in 1969, failed it twice in 1970. You get the pattern. I know what's going on because I want to be a lawyer. I took and passed the bar examination in 1980. I sat with my father. He didn't pass it. I have a brother who took the exam and passed it in 1984. My father didn't pass it. But he would not give up. He came close 3 times. He got 69%, and you only need 70%. The exam was 3 days long. There is no way I would have had the mental fortitude to keep going. But he wanted to be a lawyer. This was his dream. So he kept taking the exam. He started in 1967. In 1991, I'm in an executive session of the Compton Unified School District Board of Trustees. Someone comes to the door and the secretary comes and tells me, your brother Anthony should see you. My brother Anthony is a lawyer. When I go to the door, Anthony is holding his son, Anthony Jr., who is now a lawyer. I swore him in last year. And he says, Daddy passed the bar. On the 48th attempt, after 24 years, my father passed the California bar examination. Needless to say, the city of Compton, we went out and announced to the audience, we canceled the rest of the school board meeting. The city of Compton partied for 3 months straight. My father was on all of the news stations, all of them. And every time they interviewed him, I was right next to him because, of course, that was great publicity for my law firm. But the message I want to leave is you can do it. Don't give up on your dreams. And I'm giving you the short version. I want you to Google his name. And when you want a little bit more detail about it, shoot me an email and I'll tell you, because there's some other stuff that was going on behind the scenes that was very, very interesting. And that is very, very interesting. So that's my comment.
Wow, that's going to be hard for anybody to follow. But thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to revisit the question because you're up next, Judge Hom. What advice do you have for someone who wants to enter the legal profession, and we'll combine it with what parting remarks you would like to give anyone feeling that they might want to give up on education?
Well, law school is a huge commitment of time and money. And actually, California is one of the few states that allows you to take the bar without going to law school. But you have to apprentice with a law firm for 4 years, take the 1-year baby bar, pass that, then take the regular bar after 4 years. If you're interested in going into law, then I would speak to lawyers, and I would also go to court and sit in on court hearings. All hearings are public except for juvenile delinquency and juvenile dependency and some special motions that may be heard. So you can sit there and watch attorneys, watch judges, and see if that's a good fit for you. And also, if you're called for jury service, go. Don't just try to get out of it. Find out what it's all about. Hopefully you'll be picked and sit in the front row. I always want to sit on a jury, even now in my retired state. And I'm afraid no one's going to want me to sit. And I'm afraid that's going to be true. But I always want to know what jurors are thinking because sometimes they surprise you.
Right. Professor Quintero.
I think I would echo what folks have said about not giving up, and really, if you really want to go to law school, setting yourself up to go to law school, showing a path and a trajectory of an interest, doing an internship, working at a law firm or an organization, or taking law-related classes in undergrad, something that shows that I sat on the admissions committee at our school, and we're always looking for students that are showing that they have a genuine interest in being in law school, even if it's just, interning for a semester or a summer. And parting remarks that I would make are, follow your goals and don't give up, and be tenacious and ask lots of questions and do lots of research and find mentors, because mentors have helped me. I couldn't name on one hand all of the mentors that I have. They've helped me think through things that I had no idea about. They've helped me be a sounding board for when I had doubts. They've helped me see the better parts of myself. And then, of course, they've written letters of recommendation for me. So finding mentors, and then if you're not a law student and you're a lawyer now, mentoring and giving back to the community, going to your law school or your undergrad or whomever, and reaching back, and like Judge Filer was saying, pulling people up with you, because that's the way that we all succeed as a society.
Wonderful thoughts. Mari, what would you like to tell people?
I would say that I often thought of a law degree as something that I needed because it would help me accomplish my goals. And something that I've seen now that I'm in law school is that as much as I need this degree, like, law needs people like me. And I think that is something I wish I would have known as I was going through the LSAT and going through all the tedious things that get you to this step. The law oftentimes had a very specific type of person that was a lawyer. And if you come from a marginalized background or you have overcome adversity, your perspective is so valuable in the classroom, and I'm sure it will be out of it. Taking classes like family law and criminal law and immigration law and having lived experiences, you bring something so special to the career and to the school. And so if you're frustrated or feeling like giving up, just like remember that you have so much to offer the field too.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Professor Shelby.
My goodness, I could talk a lot, so shut me up if I talk too much. I know I will, but of course, do your research on available programs. There are innovative clinics doing incredible work at law schools across the country. Having said that, keep an open mind in terms of location. Maybe you feel like giving up because the law schools within your particular region aren't a good match, but what about a different region? Be open to that. Also, reach out to folks on LinkedIn, right? You could ask questions. You can look at the profiles of people that you're impressed by, careers that you want to emulate, and you can reach out. A nice strategy is to stroke people's egos and say, gosh, I was really impressed by this article that you wrote. I would love to chat with you about it. And so there are just so many ways to reach out to people, and don't make assumptions. I think it's very easy to make assumptions about who will be in your corner, who will be your advocate, but at the end of the day, you really don't know. We've talked a lot about reaching out. For me personally, as someone who experienced childhood trauma, my immediate response is to withdraw, to like go into a hole, to kind of deal with things on my own. So I have had to repeatedly tell myself across my career to do the exact opposite of that. Like, go ask the questions, reach out. Beth, you said this earlier, you do not know what you do not know. And there may be help out there for you in terms of financing your education or unique and tailored programs that are available to you. You just have to, at least from my perspective, kind of do the opposite of just holding up and being withdrawn, because there is so much help out there for you. Understanding the value of your differences is huge. I mean, Mari, you already had mentioned that. I think starting school, I thought my differences were a liability. Like, I don't belong here. There's no way, like, I have to do all of this catching up. But my goodness, those lived experiences provide their own level of expertise. Even in business law, right? We could talk a lot about how your lived experiences directly affect business law and economic justice. right? The ABA actually had a phenomenal summit on economic justice that I participated in. So understand the value of your differences. And then also, I think I'll conclude by saying that for students who are entering the gates of higher education after experiencing adversities, we often don't have a strong enough sense of entitlement. We often have the opposite problem. So it's okay to be entitled to prosperity. It's okay to have a sense of entitlement when it comes to safety. It's okay to have a sense of entitlement when it comes to peace. And all of these things that are associated with dignity and humanity. And having that sort of mindset just really helps to access all of these untapped resources.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We are down to our last 4 minutes, 5 minutes, but we do have a question in the Q&A, and it's not necessarily a powder puff question. So I know this is coming to you cold, so I will let you volunteer your answers. The question is, if you were to choose a book that describes you, what book and why? Who wants to take that one?
Well, you can check my book. I've written a book of poetry called Race Ipsa Loquitur. It describes me totally.
Okay, that's a great answer. Everybody look that book up.
Race Ipsa Loquitur, by the way, is Latin for the thing speaks for itself. You'll learn that when you go to law school.
Anyone else want to address that? I'm a little embarrassed, but because no one else is saying anything, I will say I don't know if the movie Legally Blonde was a book before it was a movie, but if it was, I feel like it sort of describes me, in that someone I was dating that I really thought appreciated me at one point made a comment that because I hadn't gone to a top 10 school like he had for undergrad, he just felt that I was unambitious and unworthy of him. And so when I went to law school and he didn't go on to graduate school, there you go. It kind of defines my life. So anybody else?
Can I just add one other comment as we are towards the end, is that I want to make sure that they can get my email if they have any questions, follow-up questions or comments, or they want to talk. I'd be more than happy to talk to them. Also, I'm volunteering right now to swear in all of the new attorneys. I want to swear Mari in. If you want me to, I will swear you in when you pass the California bar exam.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I do want to point out, in our title, we didn't really address it. This was so focused on the legal profession, but obviously we are all lawyers. This is being brought to you by the American Bar Association. And so that has been the lens through which we have looked at the from adversity to success, why education matters. I hope you've enjoyed this program today. I found it to be extremely inspiring, and I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing what could really be considered personal information for you all to inspire you as well. I want to thank you for joining us for this free webinar. I've already expressed I'm reading now from my script. We've already expressed our gratitude to the panelists. This section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides these free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope that these help with your work. If you can, please consider becoming active in the ABA and joining the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. I should point out that law students can join the ABA and our section for free, as I believe can undergraduate students as well. It might be a little known fact, but I believe it to be true. So please reach out to us. Please join in our work. Join the education committee of the Civil Rights and Social Justice section. I know they're always looking for people committed to furthering education and education rights. And we hope that you just have a wonderful rest of your day and that you all stay